So, Michael, do you want to go ahead and walk through what people can use SBA loans for?
Sure. This is a partial list right here, but purchase an existing business of almost any kind. Now, as Nancy was just talking about, what that means is that you're not really having to prove anything. The business will either qualify because it is already fundable, meaning that it is profitable enough, or it won't. It's nothing that you're doing to make that happen. It is purely the fact that you're buying an existing business that meets the SBA qualifications. The qualifications are very stringent. They do a ton of research. And so if you're buying a business that has the income to support the purchase, then you are automatically going to be in the black from the day that you purchase that business. Purchase a property or the resources to expand a business. Okay, so if you own let's talk about that donut shop I mentioned earlier. They have 3 gourmet food trucks and 1 physical location, but they're using the SBA loan, even though they're using the money for 4 different purposes in one loan, they're purchasing a second location. That's a very expensive thing to build out. They're not buying the building, but they're doing a very expensive upfit. They're looking at spending $450,000 on opening this donut shop location. And that's just on the inside of a building that they don't own.
Right, and if they wanted to, they could also purchase. You just told me about the furniture company that's up north, and they were renting for $17,000 a month or something ridiculous, renting where they worked, and the renting.
No, they were renting for $27,000 a month.
Right, and which included their workshop or production facilities, and then their big showroom. And you
separate, yes, and they had to drive back and forth every day, all day. They were driving back and forth,
right? And you
between the 2 locations.
And you just basically asked them, why don't you just want to go ahead and own something? Because you're paying enough to buy something. And they well, that's what they go ahead.
That's what they did in the end, is that they took their 2 locations that they were renting. One is showroom, one is warehouse. They consolidated them into a single building that faced a road, so the front of the building could be showroom and the back of the building could be warehouse. So they consolidated. Their real estate is worth twice as much. They were about to save a huge amount of money, and they actually kind of overbought the building. So they went and bought a much bigger space than they would have.
But they actually own the building. They actually own the building and the land under it. They actually own the SBA is actually purchasing for these people a physical land and a building.
It's not just land and a building. Land and a building, and there are 3 partners in that transaction. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about almost $2 million worth of the sign in front of the building, the upfit, the shelving, the what do you call those? The forklifts, everything that's going inside that building, other than the actual bathtubs and showers, and those are the kind of things that they sell, is being done by the SBA. And we did it in 2 loans. We've already closed the building for about $2.2 million. The tenant, or the future tenant themselves, the owner of the building now, they are still deciding how much they want to spend. So in other words, we did a 2 close. The first was for the building. The second one, which will be somewhere between $1 and $2 million, will be for how that building is going to be
outfitted,
improved, outfitted, literally the shelving and the lighting and the big pylon sign in front of the building, which sometimes costs over $100,000 for that big sign, is all being put into the second loan. And when I say second, they will, in other words, they literally are going to do payments. Yes.
Right.
But it's no different than if they had done it at one time. The problem with them is that they weren't really ready. The seller of the building had agreed to sell the building on a certain day, and he was being very tough, basically threatening that he was going to sell it to somebody else. And so the SBA stepped in and said, let's separate the loans, let's close on the building, then we'll close on the business.
Cool. Well,
Even
And
though they already own the business, they're closing on the improvement to their
yeah,
business.
so they're just doing two operations. It'll be two SBA loans, but it's happening one after the other. And then the other
But
thing,
for one business, yes.
right? And then you're talking about, and then you mentioned that you can actually use it to purchase a franchise as well.
Yeah, franchises is terrific. It's actually, our minimum is $1 million SBA loan.
Mm-hmm.
The SBA will do a smaller loan, but we'll go down to maybe $600,000 if you're doing a franchise. The reason is that if there's a $5 million cap, almost everyone who buys a franchise will eventually buy a second and a third and a fourth and a fifth. So we're willing to go lower on a franchise.
Mm-hmm.
Franchises are actually very simple and straightforward with the SBA because they have, again, all the statistics in the world. Subway is a bad example, but it's the first thing that came to mind. If they've done 1,000 Subway restaurants, they know everything about what will and won't work. They can look at a Subway restaurant, the SBA, and instantly tell you if the numbers work. So it's actually not as complicated as you might think when it comes to franchise, because it's absolutely Domino's Pizza, cookie cutter, exactly the same every time.
Right, and they already know all the numbers, and everybody, and the SBA has already agreed. Already knows that they make money, so it's just a very straightforward gig. So let's just take
Yes, but they also know in reverse. They instantly will tell you that franchise is not doing so well. There's a positive and negative rating. I mean, so it's not just positive. They will also tell you, oh, that franchise doesn't work and that one does.
Yeah, so
if you're looking at two different franchises,
they'll actually tell you
you can instantly.
Yeah.
Yes.
They'll actually tell you can't have that business. It's not going to work. We're not funding it because we know.
Well, they also can say it's a highly suspect one. If one is 100% positive and one is 7% negative, do you really want to try and climb up that rope, or do you want to just go with the one that's 100% positive and you can close them that way?
Right. So you mentioned that when if somebody just buys a business, which is just to say a business that's renting a location, like let's say I want to buy a donut shop, but the donut shop doesn't own the location that it's at, but does good business. I can use an SBA loan to buy that donut shop, and I have up to 10 years to repay that loan. But if the donut shop owned the little storefront that it was in, actually owned the property in the storefront, I could take up to 25 years to repay the loan. So once people are buying real estate, it makes it so that they can have a much longer term for the loan. Is that correct?
That is correct. It's an amortization. In other words, if you make your even payments every single month, after 10 years, you're paid off if you're buying a business only. But if you're buying a business and building, but as long as the building is at least 51% of the purchase, there's a 51% rule. If you're buying $1 million pizza parlor and you negotiate to buy the building, and the building is $1,100,000, now it's a $2.1 million deal. As long as the building value is a little bit more than the business, they call the whole thing a real estate loan. Cool. So you go from 10-year loan to 25-year. But think about, Nancy, how that's kind of obvious if you think about it a different way. You were the SBA putting on a loan guarantee on top of a bank, but you're buying a business. A business is not very tangible. Now all of a sudden it's a real estate loan. Well, there's ground underneath it. There's a building that exists. No matter what happens to that business, that building is still there. Do you understand why to them it's much safer loan?
Risk for longer because they're sitting there going, well, you're not going to blast this little property out into the outer space. So no matter what happens, if your company goes out of business, we still have the land and we know what the land value is.
Not only that, but statistically, the land value and building value are going up every year. So they have an appreciating asset. So yes, if you were the SBA, you would see it differently.
Right.
And that's why they're willing to make, you realize they're talking about somebody who comes to us and says, I want to buy a $400,000 pizza parlor. And we say, well, that's too small. And they say, oh, is it in its own building? Great. Go talk to the landlord. And all of a sudden it's a $1.2 million deal.
And it's easier to do. Everybody's happier because it's more.
Everyone's happier because it's more, because it's enough for us to do, because our minimum's $1 million. It's a safer loan for the bank and the SBA. So it's better on all levels.
Right.
Yes.
So now the other thing you mentioned is, let's say you're just a normal person wandering around the street thinking you've wanted to start a business for a while, and your personal credit score is like 650. You can actually just go and look around for businesses that are in the industry that you want to buy, and you can actually just go get an SBA loan to actually buy that business. So your personal credit score, it can't be really super low unless you've got, but it's 650 is not incredible. It's not very high at all. Because what matters is what the business's value is, not your value. It's like it's not. It's the business is the thing that matters, and the business is something that generates revenue. So they're going to look at the business to see if it's generating revenue, and then the
credibility for the deal is really coming in by the business you're buying, and not from the buyer. The buyer is 20% of the decision, or 15%, not the substantial part. The substantial part is, does the business make sense, and does the business warrant the SBA loan?
Right.
Not you.
So let me go ahead and let's go ahead and go to the next slide, and let's see, because we have some examples that make it clear. And with your permission, I'll sort of read through the example. So the first example is a startup business founder, Fred White, wants to found a business that publishes apps for businesses. He uses an SBA loan to purchase an advertising agency for $1.2 million, which has revenues of $40K from 350 active customers. $40K a month, I mean. He pays 6% interest in his SBA loan. He's going to pay 6% interest, so his payments are going to be about $13,000 a month. He replaces the business owner, who the company was earning $40K a month, and the business owner was taking home $20K a month. And Fred takes $13K of the $20K that he gets, and he uses it to pay the SBA loan, which means he's taking home now $7,000 a month. As he's like, literally, the second he buys that business, he's taking home $7K a month. And he continues running the advertising agency, and then he launches his app publishing service inside the agency's customer base. So in effect, he's taken his app company and he's moved it inside the startup that he just purchased. And then he doubles revenues in 2 years. So in that particular example, Fred used an SBA loan to acquire customers, cash flow, and profits, and as a launch pad for his new enterprise that will immediately be more attractive to investors, because now he's got assets, he's got cash flow, he's running in the black. So he's going to need less money. And in addition to that, if he wanted to get money from investors in equity, or if he wanted to get finance, he's in a great place to do it because he's got a company that's in the black. Is that description that I just gave correct?
Yeah, it's a terrific example. It really emphasizes all of the benefits, and you have to compare that to starting a business from scratch. You don't have a building, you don't have a person, you have no equipment, you have no customers, compared to this. This is a perfect use. And you were talking about how much Fred makes, the $7,000 that he takes home every month. That is a benefit, but that's also a requirement. Don't forget, if you're going to do an SBA loan, you have to have this as your primary business. So if it's your primary business, it has to be able to afford you. So it's required that you're going to make enough money from that business, Nancy.
Right. So the SBA won't let you make the loan unless they know for a fact that you personally are going to make a living.
That is correct. And I can tell you that there's actually a scenario we had where there was someone that made a fortune in his other business, and it was actually a problem because he was living on $350,000 from some incredible job that he had. And he was then going to buy an SBA loan where he was only going to make, there was only $60,000 or $70,000.
Mm-hmm.
And the SBA looked at it and said, wait a second, this guy's going from a salary of $350,000 to $70,000. How can that make sense for him? And could he live on that? And it actually became a detractor because the numbers worked perfectly for that business if someone who was unemployed or didn't have such an incredibly high salary bought that business. But for him, it became a problem.
Wow. That's
Because you're taking a pay cut.
right. So, let's go on to the next example, and then we'll talk for a minute about why people would ever sell a business. Because I think that's another thing people just don't get, is that people do sell businesses because they want to retire or whatever. So let's look at the next example. So SBA loan example number 2. Harriet Wilson has a custom furniture business which is currently earning $40K a month and generating a profit of about $8K per month. She rents this is exactly the one we just talked about, really. She rents the warehouse and showroom where a business operates for $10K a month. She uses an SBA loan of $1.2 million to purchase a nicer building that's twice as big as her current space and closer to her customers. She now pays $7.7K per month for her space, but she owns it, and she generates a profit of $10K a month, and the new location is translating into more sales. So in that particular situation, she went from being a renter to an owner of the property underneath her business. And she ended up literally making it easier for her to make more money just because she took an existing business and used an SBA to acquire an asset.
Mm-hmm. And you can, when you buy it, if you are a business that could get an SBA loan, an existing business, you can move your business into a building. You could find a building across town and move your business into that building and buy that building. You don't have to buy the building your business is already sitting in. Mm-hmm. Just like the example of the kitchen and bathroom company, where they took 2 separate buildings they were renting, they left both of them and abandoned both of them to consolidate into a single new building.
Perfect.
And they can also build from scratch. It doesn't even have to be an existing building. It mm-hmm. just takes a whole lot longer to build. So I'm not recommending it.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to sort of return to the thing that we sort of talked about, that the businesses are for sale all of the time. You know, every one of us that's currently running a startup is in the position of, we're launching a business because we're young and we're strong, reasonably speaking, and we're aggressive and we have something that we want to do. But and our objective is to make a profitable business. But there's going to come a day when we're sick of that business, and then at that point we're going to kind of want to cash out. We're going to want to get a whole chunk of cash so we can move on to doing something different, or we're going to want to retire. So we're going to get the money out of the company, and we're going to go put it in the bank and live off of it, you know, in our golden years. So people are selling businesses all the time, so you can buy them. The SBA what the SBA does. It lets you buy those businesses. So you mentioned that, and there's a whole bunch of sites where you can find businesses listed for people that are actively trying to sell them. You can also, if you know somebody who's got a business you want to buy, you can just approach them and say, I want to buy your business. I mean, most people aren't going to get mad if you say, I want to buy your business. They're going to say, well, how much do you want to pay? And you go, well, how much do you want? And then you're having a conversation about how much it costs. Mm-hmm. But there's sites like BuyBizSell that list businesses by location, price, and industry. So I want you to talk for a minute. Let's say, so you do have to have like 10% down to buy a business. So if I'm buying a $1.2 million business, I'm going to have to come up with $120K. But the thing is, I'm allowed to have investors. So that's right. I can actually go to an investor and I can say, look, I'm getting an SBA loan. I'm going to buy this business, and I'm going to own this one. I'm going to buy it for $1.2 million. It's got property attached, and I want you to give me, you know, the $120K, and I'm going to give you 15% ownership of the business, which will mean a couple of things. If I go out of business, the business is actually secured by this property, so you have actually 15% ownership of that property, whatever's there. So if we have to close the business down, you have some security. And the other thing is, my business is much more likely to be strong because I'm getting the SBA loan. I'm acquiring assets and resources that are likely to make my business grow quickly because I'm getting money on good terms, and I'm starting with an established business. And I think one of the things you told me, which I had never heard before, but which is incredible, which I think is it's just something that nobody's ever mentioned to me before, is that if you have an investor, if they're giving you less, you're giving them less than 20% ownership, they're not on the hook for the loan. So if you and I go in and we're going 50-50 and we do an SBA loan, then you and I are both on the hook for paying that loan back. You can't get out from, if the business goes out of business, and we both still owe that money, because that's the way the SBA works. But if I have 85% and you have 15% ownership, then they just put me on the loan. They don't put you on the loan because you don't have 20% of the loan value. So that means that your investor can safely give you you can give him 15% ownership of the business, and he can safely give you the $120K to make the loan go through.
That is correct. And you could actually have multiple investors. I think the maximum is 4 plus you, 5 in total. So you can have up to 4 separate investors.
Mm-hmm.
You can give each one up to 20%
mm-hmm.
ownership. So you can sell 10% to one, 6% to another, 15% to another. They do not have to sign now. They can sign on the loan if they wanted to, but of course they don't have to, and nobody would if
mm-hmm.
they didn't have to.
And they could give you more than the amount that you need for the loan down payment.
It's not proportional. That means that you're not dividing it. If you're giving them 15% ownership, they don't have to come up with 15% of the down payment. They could come up with 60% or 100%.
Or 120%. In other words, you can say,
whatever you negotiate.
This is such a good deal that that buying 10% of my business is going to cost you $100,000, even though, and you could do that with 3 different people, so you end up with $300,000, even though your down payment is only going to be $100,000 on $1 million loan. In other words, you can actually have 3 investors you can literally start an SBA loan in the black, not just in the black, but with money in your hand from investors right away. And the business itself could be actually paying you money as well. I mean, it's just normal business, because really what it is what you're doing is you're shopping for a business, and the SBA is giving you the money to make the loan, and you're not doing anything shady. This is what people do with SBA loans. This is why so many people do SBA loans. You just have to know what the hell they're doing with them, and nobody explains it.
I've seen it done actually in reverse, Nancy, mm-hmm. where somebody who really didn't have the credibility or the credit or the stick-to-itiveness, they brought an SBA loan to someone and said, this is great for you, but if you take it, I want whatever the percentage, 9%, 6% ownership. Mm-hmm. So they were given ownership, all kind of a little bit like a brokerage fee. Mm-hmm. They were given ownership. They arranged the SBA loan. They found the business, mm-hmm. and they took a percentage that was less than 20%. So they didn't really, they took it like a brokerage fee.
Right.
But they also had no liability.
Or sometimes even the owner will give you the 10%, right? So
right.
If
I'm talking about legally. You're talking about an actual brokerage. I'm talking about somebody coming to the table and saying, "Oh, here, my friend Nancy, I think you would love this business. If you buy this business, I want 6% ownership."
Right. No, but I'm saying
I can have an ongoing ownership without any liability.
Right. So you're saying that somebody who was very entrepreneurial, like if we had somebody on the call who was very entrepreneurial and was mm-hmm. good at spotting businesses that would be good for people to buy, creating that matchmaking, they could actually use this to end up owning small percentages of lots of businesses and actually and generating revenue from making those kinds of matches. And
it's unlimited how many you can do because mm-hmm. you're not on the loan. Remember the $5 million cap? It doesn't exist if you're not on the loan.
Right. So that means that you could basically do this matchmaking. If you're very entrepreneurial and you can spot a good business deal, you can basically do this kind of matchmaking and make a profit. The other thing I wanted to make sure people understood is that sometimes you find, just like with a house, you might find a business owner who's very motivated and you can say, look, I'm going to buy your business. But I don't have I don't have 10%. And they'll go, you know what? I want to get out of this business so bad. And I do happen to have the 10%. I will literally I'm going to get out of this business. I'm going to give you the 10% that you need to do the down payment. And I'm going to own 10% of the resulting business, or whatever. I'm going to give you the money so you can do this deal. So I can cash out of this business. I get the, because they're going to get the payment I buy somebody's business and they give me 10% of the money that they get, so that I can do the deal. Right. In other words, it's just like when people take a second mortgage.
Actually, it's a little variation on that.
Mm-hmm.
What we do is the banks normally want 25 to 35% down.
Mm-hmm.
So what we often do is we often create a seller's mortgage, or
mm-hmm.
we get the seller to contribute a loan of 15%. So they give 15% for, let's say, on a 2-year note. For the deal. That does two things. One is it requires the buyer to only come in with 10% instead of 25%. The other is it makes the SBA more comfortable because they know that the owner of the business believes in that buyer. And we do this almost every day. I mean, this is very common practice. So the seller is showing that they're comfortable with the buyer. The seller is involved long-term. Usually create a 2-year loan from the seller to the buyer.
That's perfect. So anyway, I think we should probably move on because this is going to confuse people.
I think we're done.
Things are clean now.
Okay.
But I mean, I don't think anybody's ever explained this. So I want to talk one more, the last thing on this page, which I think is important, is that many banks say that they do SBA loans. An SBA loan, in effect, is the government, the Small Business Administration, tells a bank, you can make this loan and we will secure it. So if this guy doesn't pay back the money he's borrowed, we'll cover it. It's, in effect, the SBA is insuring the loan. So a lot of banks say that you can work with them to do SBA loans, but a lot of them for all practical purposes, lie. And can you sort of talk about, I think you mentioned to me that, and again, this totally explains why I always found SBA loans, like, I didn't even think they really existed. I thought they were like unicorns. I really did. And because, for exactly this reason, when the bank has a loan, a guy sitting at a desk, and you go in and you say, I want to do an SBA loan. And he knows probably that you either own a business or you want to buy a business. And he wants to get you to open an account in his bank. So he's going to tell you anything. And he's going to also try to get you to move your mortgage there and all kinds of things because he wants you to put your stuff there. And doing an SBA loan can take 90 days. So he's going to submit your paper, he's going to say, submit the deal and so forth to the people at the bank who would have to approve doing an SBA loan, who have to do due diligence and all this extra work. And if it doesn't work out, well, that's too bad for you. They don't really care because they might have, a given bank, even a really big bank, might only do in a given month, 4 or 9 of SBA loans, and they get thousands of applications. So, and they're not comparing them. They basically, whatever's the loan on top, they look through it. If it's easy to do due diligence on, they do it. And if it's not, well, screw that. They go on to the next one in the pile. And as soon as they grant those loans for that month's loans, they take the whole pile of stuff on their desk, push it into the trash can, and look at the next month's loans, because they're not going to go back to somebody 6 months later and say, oh, the SBA loan you wanted, we're going to give it to you. It's like if you don't get given that loan in that first 90-day window, they're just going to push your option into the trash, and they're not going to let you know that they're going to do that. I had never realized that that's because they don't care. The SBA, they're not that motivated, to do SBA.
Sure. Their job is to bring you in as a client, and that's it. They don't really care about anything else. And, they call it taking it off the street. If you come in and say, I have this beautiful loan, this greatest opportunity ever. I've already put down $20,000. I'm going to work with you over the next 60, 90 days. I need to get this SBA loan done. They will say yes no matter what. They'll say yes to 100 people that walk in that door, even though they know they've only set aside enough energy, effort, money, and everything else to do 4 of them, 5 of them. And they don't care because they want that pile to be huge, because they want the clients, they want the data, and they don't want you walking across the street and doing an SBA loan with their competitor. So they take the loan off the street by saying, we'll do it.
Right.
And if you don't get the loan done, you lose a great opportunity. You lose your deposit. None of that matters to them at all. At all.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the difference between working with us and working with a bank.
Right. And actually we should move on to sort of what you guys do. I mean, this isn't really a sales pitch, for your company or anything like that. I mean, I wanted to interview you, but I want to talk about why I wanted to interview, and this is specifically why. So your company does business management and consulting services, and specifically focuses on making it so people have the right finance resources from sort of day one of they open their business all the way through 5, 10, 20 years. Your objective is to sort of stay with the people that you support over a long period of time. A lot of the most of the things that you do for people, you're always available on a consulting basis. People can call you up and request time with a problem that they're facing and that they want to get your advice on how to handle. But you offer sort of a certain set of consulting services where, like helping people, like doing SBA loans for people where they don't pay unless unless the loan closes. That's when you refer to the fact that your limit is 1 million to 5 million. What you mean is, if somebody comes to you and say, I want to buy this business, they just basically email you, I want to buy this business. And it's for $1.3 million. You'll take a look at the business, and you'll take a look at them, and you will let them know whether or not you can get them an SBA loan. And if they say, yeah, let's go forward, then you'll go ahead and get them the SBA loan. And they're not paying anything at all until the loan is completely closed. And
other than any accounting or any legal work that they have to take care of. But
right.
yes,
but in other words, you're not charging them anything in terms of the service of actually getting the SBA loan.
Absolutely not.
Getting it to the bank that's actually going to go ahead and give them an SBA loan. So
no, we only get paid upon success. Yes.
Right. And most of your consulting. If people buy you on an hourly basis or something like that for advice, that's one thing. But if people are asking you to help them increase their business credit or personal credit or negotiate SBA loans or something like that, services like that, you never charge anything up front.
Nope, we don't believe in it.
Right, because the thing is, as you pointed out a long time ago, the issue is that otherwise people are paying for failure. Like if the people are paying upfront fees for people that are providing these kinds of services, they're literally paying for failure. They're going to pay people regardless of whether or not they succeed. And since there'll be no incentive to succeed, they're going to end up mostly paying the money and not getting anything. So the only way it actually works legitimately is if somebody says, you only have to pay me if you get the money that you promised and to the extent that you got it. So if you're negotiating SBA loan for somebody, if you basically setting it up so they get the SBA loan, the little percentage that you get is going to be based on how much of a loan they get, and it's going to be after closing, after they've got the property and all those things. It's not going to be done until the property is actually in their hands. The business that they've purchased is already in their hands.
Well, actually, when it comes to an SBA loan, we're paid at closing. So we're paid. Mm-hmm. We're actually on the loan documents, so it's all very clean and simple.
Right, and it meets the SBA requirements for how those have to be documented.
Yeah, and it's usually amortized over the length of the loan. So even though our fee is very small for this kind of loan, mm-hmm. You're going to pay it over 10 years or over 25 years.
Right. It might be like what kind of fees, like just out of curiosity, like what percentage?
We do Actually, the recommended fee from the SBA, which is 2% of the first million,
Mm-hmm.
and 1/4 of 1% thereafter. So that equates to $20,000 for $1 million SBA loan,
Mm-hmm.
all the way up to $30,000 for a $5 million SBA loan.
Right. Okay. So that's basically, so if you negotiate, so like the deal where you're doing the guy in the people that are doing the $5 million 2-part loan and wherever, you're going to end up netting 30K out of that whole deal.
Yeah, or a little less. Yeah, they're going to probably be close to 4.25 or something. Yes.
Right. And they're not going to pay it. It's literally going to come right out of the loan. It's like what the loan
It's not
actually
out of the loan, it's added to the loan. So
Mhm.
if we ended up with a $4 million loan, it'll be a $5 million loan. It would be 5 million plus the 30,000. So
Right.
added on after the fact.